From the second that KJ Martin was re-signed to this Philadelphia 76ers team, he was viewed as the avenue to bring in the win now missing piece that this team needs. Well, now a couple months into the season, there's a chance that he very well may have developed into that exact player in himself here. I want to break down why the perception of KJ Martin needs to change a little bit, why I do think we should read into a little bit of the trust that Nick Nurse is showing in the 24-year-old or soon to be 24-year-old, and where that changes things from a trade perception from the Sixers team. So to start off with, in the most recent matchup against the Charlotte Hornets here, the Sixers did produce the second victory of the season in which Paul George, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey have all started and finished. Just the second time all season, the Chicago Bulls victory being the other one there. And what I thought was particularly interesting here is when that starting lineup came out, of course, those three stars in it, in Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, and Joel Embiid. No surprise to see Kelly Oubre as the starting shooting guard there. But then when you look towards that starting power forward position here, there is our guy, KJ Martin, locking things down here. And I do not think this should be something that we should be taking particularly lightly. Nick Nurse has also shown a little bit of tendencies that he does not tend to trust the young guys that much. And I think throwing KJ Martin into this mix is pretty telling on the belief that Nurse has in him. Now, to talk about KJ Martin a little bit specifically, he is not a guy that the stat sheet will tell the story to. On the season, averaging 6.7 points per game, 2.7 rebounds, just 0.8 assists, 0.7 blocks, 0.4 steals, shooting 64.7% from the field, 41.2% from beyond the three-point arc, which is a great sign there, but I will say it is limited sample size. Soon to be 24 years old, still a lot of youth on his side. Now, when we got into the KJ Martin conversations for really the bulk of the offseason, so often we talked about him basically being a human trade exception. And why that is the case is you sign one of these quote-unquote balloon contracts, with the meaning being that basically you're giving yourself a cushion under the salary cap here. And for the Sixers specific situation, due to them being in the first tax apron here, they cannot take in more salary than they send out in a trade for any deal under any circumstance here. So when you bring in KJ Martin or re-sign him to this team and give him a little bit more than he is potentially worth, you do create a window of opportunities to break things down here. Now, before I dive fully into the ins and outs of that and why I think that has changed from a Sixers perspective, do want to highlight exactly what he did on the floor. And there are two specific plays that I think tell the story of KJ Martin tonight, with the first one being the very first bucket that the Sixers scored overall. So to pull that up here, we can see a little action where KJ Martin comes off a screen, they throw a lob to Nick Richards, and Martin is up there sending it back here. That sort of verticality, that ability to rise with a true big man in the NBA in Nick Richards there, a guy who about is as normal or as typical of a big man as you will find from NBA standards there, that KJ is able to match that at just 6'6". So we're going to look at that one more time, and I do want you guys to pay attention to the level of verticality that he shows just getting up to deflect this basketball here, and the tone that sets for the Sixers team, being able to get out and transition and ultimately creating the first bucket of the game for Tyrese Maxey there. And by the way, very nice to see the three-point shots going down for Tyrese Maxey. Again, it has been a tough shooting start to the season for him. Sort of my message there is that he's been playing good basketball, just the shots have not been falling, but now these shots are starting to fall. And when speaking about Tyrese Maxey specifically, it does feel that there is a genuine chemistry between KJ Martin and Maxey here. Now, in general, the more I'm speaking to is sort of the two-man actions, him setting screens, him serving as a roll man, and I've used this comparison before. When you think back to the prime James Harden and the success that he had there, PJ Tucker, not the washed-up version of PJ Tucker that showed up in Philadelphia during his brief stint here, but when PJ Tucker still had a pulse as a basketball player, what he was so effective at was setting screens for Harden, being a low-usage player, and being able to roll on the short roll, get the ball back, be able to play make a little bit, kick to corners to shooters. We're seeing a lot of those same instincts from KJ Martin, and this is something that each Maxey and Martin have been pretty open about. Now, when showing their chemistry on the court tonight, there is one lob in particular that I do want to highlight here. And you can see the Sixers producing the steal, one of their 14 on the night. Maxey throwing it up where only KJ Martin can get it, and him slamming it directly home. And I also love, not to brush over it here, look at him getting right back in transition after slamming this thing down. He did not stop to celebrate. He was back locked in. So shout out to KJ, man. I do love that. And I will say, to get into a little bit of kind of the cap side of things here and why he is such a highlighted name for how these Sixers can increase, let's dive into what these Sixers are looking at. So I'm going to pull up their cap sheet here, and you can see each of these numbers being the specific cap hit, how much it counts against the salary cap, and where I would break things down or just kind of give you guys like the simplicities of it it's almost like the cap has sort of shifted into, being slots rather than pure dollars. That there is the max contracts that you get, and those being a set percentage of the cap is how you come up with these numbers. So what the NBA has gotten right compared to other leagues from a player's perspective here is they have not negotiated or a set number for when they sign these max contracts or what you can be, they sign up to the percentage instead of the set dollar amount. So as the salary cap increases, as revenue increases, so do these guys' pockets. And that's why we're seeing so much of these lucrative contracts. For Joel Embiid specifically, he will be a $51 million cap hit this season. Paul George, $49 million. Tyrese Maxey, $35 million there, and I'm kind of rounded on each of these here. And those are their 3 max slots that they do have. And when you make those level of deals, when you commit that much of the salary cap to these top dogs, these big names here, you kind of do have to dig in the bargain bin a little bit below. And that's where it's important to hit on a guy like Gershon Yabusele, who's a $2 million deal, a minimum contract, can always sign those basically regardless of the salary cap there. But when looking above, you can see the way the cap hits break down here that Caleb Martin, of course, being fourth, an $8 million cap hit that he has in a multi-year contract, which I'm going to circle back to that conversation. Kelly Oubre next at $7.9 million there, and Kenyon Martin Jr., our guy KJ Martin, right below that at $7.975 million. Now, when this contract was signed, this was very much viewed as the intent to be traded, and I still think there is absolutely a chance that is the case, but I do think the Sixers are walking that back a little bit. Now, for Martin specifically, do want to pull up the multi-year contract view at this point, that you can see a little bit of a faded gray next to his name, and you can kind of see him 6th down on the list there in that same order, and ultimately $7.975 million cap hit for this year, and it is a non-guaranteed deal for next year. So the reason that is so appealing to teams is there are the pros and cons. Like, for example, if you really like a guy, you obviously want him on several years of contract, so he's in team control, you have a chance to keep him. There's also teams that very much view it as a positive when a guy is on an expiring deal, that it can just be viewed as a salary cap kind of hit. You pay him for the season, and that money gets off the books in itself here. For KJ Martin specifically, where it was basically viewed from the Sixers perspective as that is just the number, you attach the draft picks and actually get to the guy that you want. So, for example, Herb Jones is a guy that we've talked plenty about on this channel, and a guy that I still would be very excited about to see in a Sixers uniform here. If Herb Jones is the target, and this is not a clean example, as the dollar amount I don't believe off the top of my head works exactly 1-for-1 here, but just for the sake of example, if Herb Jones is the target, there's no world in which the Pelicans are looking at it and saying KJ Martin is the upgrade. But from the Pelicans' perspective, it has been a season from hell, basically. Even worse injury luck than this Sixers team. So what your conversation is, we are basically punting the season and moving our focus to next year. And what the real appeal of a trade would be those draft picks. So if KJ Martin is just quote-unquote, the dollar amount that makes it work here, you attach those draft picks, and those are the prize of the deal. Even the Sixers trade, sending James Harden out, the deal that initially brought KJ Martin back, it was those draft picks that were the prize of that trade. Yes, Nico Batum was fun to have on the team. Yes, Marcus Morris brought something. It was nice to have him playing in Philadelphia. KJ Martin, of course, we're seeing the spark, that there are these moments here. But the reality is, the appeal was having those draft picks, and those were the salaries that made it work. Sort of in a similar situation, that's the box that KJ Martin was kind of thrown in, but I do believe there's a little bit more to him than that. And to kind of talk about his stats on the season, this is the third team that he has played for here in Philadelphia. Started his career with the Houston Rockets, a guy that was a second-round pick. I kind of have a little bit of sympathy from KJ from the standpoint of obviously his dad is Kenyon Martin Sr., a guy who had a very successful NBA career, stuck around for quite a bit of time. I think KJ Martin was thrown a little bit on that rush trajectory, as he was a guy who never went to college, did a prep season at IMG Academy before entering the league, ultimately ended up a second-round pick, had to scrap out of the G League a little bit. I do think there's another world where if his name is KJ Jones and his dad is not Kenyon Martin Sr., that there is like a clearer pathway to him being on track to being this high-level NBA player, that maybe you do a season of college and then all of a sudden you're a first-round pick. But regardless, talent is still talent, and he has found his pathway, even if it is a little bit more unique than your average NBA player here. But he started his career with the Houston Rockets, and you can see a more impressive statistical output than has been the case at any other location. He only spent a brief stint with the Los Angeles Clippers, just 2 games that he suited up for the Clippers there. Kind of disappointing for KJ, as I'm sure he would have loved to have been out there. I believe his family's located in LA. But the bottom line is he was a part of this James Harden trade. And ultimately, there were some nice flashes last year, but I think he is really taking this stride forward next year. So sort of my word of caution to Daryl Morey and the Sixers organization as a whole. I'm not saying that KJ Martin is untouchable by any means. This is a guy who while I like him and have grown to like him far more this season than I ever expected to be the case, he's certainly a role player. But what I have great deal of respect for KJ is he knows exactly who he is as a basketball player, which is pretty rare from a guy at 24 years old. A lot of times we're still seeing each of these guys develop, being on their kind of whatever trajectory that they are on, figuring things out. KJ Martin's got it, man. He's never going to make anything. He's not going to make a stupid decision on the basketball floor. He's going to make the right read, going to make the simple pass, going to set a screen, and just going to compete his tail off. That the athleticism absolutely pops. And sort of one of my frustrations in the era of Joel Embiid is how often they basically just have neglected to surround him with athletes and shooters. Well, KJ Martin absolutely fits that athlete category there, and I do see a little bit of chemistry as far as the duck-ins, the baseline cuts, him being capable of guarding up in size. I do think is a real deal factor and creates some lineup flexibility there. So while I get in theory, KJ was just basically signed to be traded, I just would give a little pause to, if you're going to do that, make sure that is clearly something that helps the Sixers team. And what I think complicates the matter even further is it's tough to fully acknowledge that or have a clear answer on that, as we have not seen this team, a true sample size of what this team is supposed to look like. Once again, the victory over the Hornets was just the second time all season that Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid have started and finished a game there. And we've seen the appeal of KJ Martin both in lineups without Joel Embiid and then with him tonight. So we'll see how things shake out from here. January 15th is the date in which he is eligible to be traded, so there is about a month of sample size, a little bit less than that at this point, that you have to break down, analyze, and see how things shake out. But I will say I am more open-minded than ever to KJ Martin being a real deal part of the Sixers team and basically turning down a lot of deals at the deadline here. Still a lot to unfold at this point in time, and also I'm not going to rule out that this doesn't mean they're doing no trades. It wouldn't shock me if they shift to prioritizing maybe the Caleb Martin signing isn't working out as expected, or maybe it's more worth it to move on from a guy like Kelly Oubre here. These are just kind of food for thought statements, not something that I personally believe or expect the Sixers to lean in that angle. But my point being that while it was locked in that KJ Martin would be their top trade option, I do think that take is probably walked back a little bit from a Sixers perspective. So still a lot more basketball to be played and a lot more questions to be answered, but do want to hear your guys' thoughts on that as well. Are you with me on the pulse of KJ Martin might end up being more important to the Sixers team than anyone expected to be the case, or do you think, I don't care, let's get in the trade rumors, let's find somebody better, sign me up for Herb Jones, sign me up for Dorian Finney-Smith, sign me up for Bobby Portis, whoever the name that you have in mind is? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. As always, appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning in this video here. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video, and I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.